TCI is brought to you by Spendthrift Stallion Patio Prado, sire of Preakness runner-up and Belmont Stakes contender Cherry Wine from his first crop to race. There's still time to breed secure in 2016.
Welcome back to TCI, your inside track to the Triple Crown. Alongside Joel Cunningham, I'm John Siegel. Well, Joel, this is a show where we're really going to dig into the Belmont Stakes, and we're going to talk about a formula that you've used over the years, and you feel pretty confident in it going into the Belmont. I know you believe a lot in the pedigree and the dosage, so we're going to run down through here, but let's take a look at the TCI top 10, and let's just run through a couple of horses. I know we had some come off. Tell me about it and tell me how you think this field's sizing up.
Yeah, we're just kind of now seeing the field shape up. Really didn't have an indication last week. I thought Gun Runner, there's a potential with his pedigree. They could run him back in here fresh, try to win a classic. They're not running. Neither is Mo Tom now. So I'm moving two horses in out of the Peter Pan that have a race over the track. Both of them came running late. That race over the track at Belmont I do think is beneficial. And I do think, in particular, Wild About Deb's pedigree is very interesting. He's a horse making his fourth lifetime start. Is really just a maiden winner. But if you think he has a little bit of quality, again, remember the Dataras, remember the Ruler on Ice. You don't have to be the classiest horse to win this race. You have to be in form like the racetrack, and your pedigree has to allow you to stay that mile and a half.
Well, we got a lot of horses on this list that are in form, that are ready to run well in this race. We also are hearing, the horse you have in number 4 here, American Freedom, looks like he may not run in the Belmont Stakes. We just got that news here just a little bit ago. So, let's jump into this dosage index and let's talk about these Tomlinson numbers. Every year, I know we catch, a little bit of slack for what we believe and kind of the formula that you have. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy and why you have these horses listed the way you do.
Well, really, universally in the industry, the two biggest indicators of stamina, at least from a, quantitative standpoint, is the dosage index, and then you have the Tomlinson number, which is published in the DRF past performances. I like to show both columns. Quite honestly, I'm a lot more of a dosage index fan. We put the Tomlinson in here, which isn't really, their methodology isn't as nearly as deep as the dosage index. I put them in here just as an indicator. I do appreciate a Tomlinson of 315, 330 or higher. But realistically, John, we're not breeding horses to run a mile and a half anymore. So I'm not so sure. When you look at the Tomlinson, it really starts looking at, the sire, the immediate sire, the broodmare sire within a breed line of a horse. For example, if I'm looking at Exaggerator, the Tomlinson's really going to grade out the Sons and Daughters of Curlin, maybe even Smart Strike, the grandsire, and then Vindication, the broodmare sire. Really going to try to look at those performances at a mile and a half and try to grade them out. The higher the number, the better. Obviously, we're not running a lot at a mile and a half. So to me, I like depth of pedigree better. And that's more indicated in the dosage index. And what I mean by that is, look at a horse like Union Rags. He had a 214 dosage number. The horse clearly, you remember the colt, he was clearly a stamina-built type colt. There was nothing that said speed about the horse whatsoever. However, if you look at his Tomlinson, it was only a 220. So that's an extremely low Tomlinson number, but the horse is by Dixie Union out of a Gone West mare. So initially, in the, just on the sire and the dam sire, you thought, well, the horse might be a miler, maybe even a sprinter looking at that pedigree. But what it didn't tell you is the depth of stamina in that pedigree in the second dam, third dam, fourth dam. Union Rags had that, and he clearly was that type of horse. His body type and his style, he handled the mile and a half distance, and the dosage index said that he would. Again, with a 2.14, which is exceptional. I like a 3.0 or under. Anything over 3, I'm not crazy about in terms of a horse that I think can excel at a mile and a half.
And you're talking to Tomlinson there. It's one thing you look back to American Pharoah, because I could just hear everybody saying that right now.
Yep.
American Pharoah's numbers really weren't something that you liked going into the Belmont.
I will say this about American Pharoah. His Tomlinson was solid. It was close to 300. His dosage index was not solid. He was out of a Yankee gentleman. You look at that female family, a lot of sprint, not really a lot of stamina indicators, even though he's by Pioneer of the Nile with the Empire Maker paternal side, and he was a stretchy kind of horse. The thing with American Pharoah is, and I'll say this because I've been to a lot of Belmonts in recent years, that track that day played to speed and rail. There was no pace in the race, and he was thriving. Again, we saw him before the Derby. We followed him. We saw him, going into the Preakness. The best I've ever seen American Pharoah looked was Belmont Week. He looked exceptional. He was on top of his game. A credit to the horse to go through that grind, and credit to the trainer. So not only was he on top of his A game in terms of his physical looks, he was lone speed over a track that was carrying speed. I've never seen Belmont play that tight in my life, you know, in terms of me being there. Speed was very good that day. I really think it's set up for American Pharoah. So again, I'm not saying that a good horse like him can't get a mile and a half. What I'm saying is they may not excel at a mile and a half based on their pedigrees. Now, let's remember, most of these horses, they'll never run this distance again, John. The furthest American distance we normally run is a mile and an eighth, maybe an eighth of a mile further, a mile and a quarter.
Right.
But now you want to take them to Belmont around those big turns, big sandy track, and run another quarter of a mile. That is substantial. That is a true, they hate it when I call it a marathon distance, but for American pedigrees, that is a marathon distance. And again, I've been following this formula through the Breeders' Cup marathons, through all the mile and a half, mile and three-quarter races that we run, and typically my system grades out and trying to find the horse that I think can excel at a mile and a half, and I really think it equalizes the field. So you look at a horse like Exaggerator, 3.40, I mean, he has a very similar profile as a horse like California Chrome, in my opinion. I personally don't like Exaggerator in a race like the Belmont because, again, I don't think a brilliant turn-of-foot type horse is a horse that wins this race. This is going to be a grinded-out race. They're going to gallop around there, and whoever gets to the bottom of their pedigree, the final quarter of a mile, is going to prevail. So a horse like Exaggerator, I think this type of distance really is going to flatten out his turn-of-foot in my view. And I'm not saying he can't handle it and he won't hit the board. Just because he's ranked down here doesn't mean that I don't think on class he can hit the board.
Sure.
I think he can certainly handle the distance. My question is, can he excel at it? And will others excel better? And will that close the gap? That's the key.
Well, you know, you mentioned a key thing about American Pharoah. He was thriving. He was coming into this race the best that he's ever been. These are all things that I'm hearing about a horse like Exaggerator right now. You know, he's doing great. His fitness level is great. The horse looks great. He feels great. So, you know, if that track is typey and we got, you know, where speed can do well on there, I don't know, it might be interesting. We could kind of see Exaggerator run well.
Let me just say this about the makeup of this race. Based on what I'm seeing here and who's probably going to run the 10 or 11, I'm seeing a lot of closers. So I'm seeing a slow pace to a moderate pace. And so I would actually give the advantage to a horse like, if you're wanting a credit on that type of racetrack, a horse maybe going wire to wire and taking advantage, I'd give the credit to Stradivari because I think he's going to be your pace setter, and I think he's a really good horse with upside. If Todd runs him, it means he's doing well. He's the horse that I think could take this group wire to wire, and he has a good dosage number below 3. That's what I'm looking for. So he's the colt I'd be most interested in that scenario, but Exaggerator's going to have to pass a lot of horses. I mean, if it's a galloper's kind of race and they're going slow to moderate, I'd prefer a horse like Destin much more than I would Exaggerator because I think that he's going to have the stamina to keep clipping along.
You know, you mentioned Stradivari. I think Todd did pretty well with another horse from an AP Indy sire line that was Commissioner. We were all kind of shocked when we saw that horse get out on the front. And then, you know, he near about won that race. He just lost by a nose that year. So
and we
know
picked
that
Commissioner.
We know that strategy works.
We picked Commissioner. He was a big price. Remember, Toneless was number 1 in our TCI top 10. I like the fact he had a race over the track and he qualified based on dosage. And he wound up beating Commissioner. But I actually picked Commissioner at a big price in there because you're right. He graded out well with that prep and the Peter Pan that I liked. And he had the pedigree, top and bottom, to handle that distance, and he nearly pulled it off at a big price.
All right, so let's talk then just real quick before I let you go and just kind of talk about your top 5 horses there and why you have these 5. You think these 5 have the best chance to win the Belmont?
Yeah, I mean, I do. You know, a horse like Destin, Brody's Cause, I mean, those are both horses that grade out. The reason I have cause for pause with Brody's Cause is that he's a closer, John. However, if you go back and look at the Bluegrass, he has a move to put himself into contention. I think that's crucial. You know, look at a lot of these dead closers that come back, you know, from further than him, like the Cherry Wine, Sudden Breaking News. I don't really like them as much. He's tactical enough that I do think he can factor in this race. You know, kind of reminds me of another Dale Romans colt that ran that year of California Chrome and Commissioner's year. And that was Metal Count, who ran a very credible race. He was up there, just didn't have the punch to pull it off, but he was a big price and was right there. I look at a horse like Creator. You know, I'm not crazy about how far he wants to come out of it. He's a little bit of an X factor. Most of these tappets don't want to handle the distance. You know, most of them have a 3.0 dosage like he does. Toneless didn't. He was under a 3.0. He's one of the very few that you'll see. He was played more to the Pleasant Colony side of his pedigree. But he has this Peruvian South American pedigree, a lot of stayer blood on the depth of the female family with Creator. My problem with him is he comes from so far back. I'm not so sure that closing punches. I think a more tactical horse like Destin has an advantage over Creator. And a horse like Lonnie. I mean, they've been waiting to run this horse a mile and a half. His dam and that Japanese female family, like Sunday Silence, if you start looking at female, you'll find a lot of stayers, a lot of mile and a half or longer horses in there. So even though he's by Tappet, I mean, you look at Lonnie, he's got a 1.92. I don't know if I've ever seen a Tappet with under 2.0 dosage. That tells you how much stamina is in Lonnie's female family. He's a very dangerous horse, in my opinion, going a mile and a half in this race.
All right, well, thank you for the information. I mean, it's interesting, and usually I will say your horses that you have up here, you're usually right when it comes to seeing the Belmont. It's a race that's always interesting to kind of see the pedigree play out.
We'll see you next week's show.
All right, well, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back next week. You'll get our picks for this year's Belmont.